Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we're jumping into a beer from one of the big beer masters that I get from Tavour, and that is Adroit Theory, based in Purcellville, Virginia. Today we're jumping into a beer called What Evil Lurks. This is a Russian Imperial Stout, clocking in at a massive 13.5% ABV. This one has been brewed with Cubano roast coffee, cacao nibs, pumpkin spices, and maple syrup. And they do always give kind of their ghost number on their beers. This one's 1119. So, label art on this first. It's creepy. It kind of looks like, I don't know, a cross between label art from like Diablo the video game and Alien the film. I don't know how else to describe it, but it looks very dark indeed to go along with the namesake. And as always, they do give you suggested pairings on the label, so I will read those out. Food, they say to pair this with roasted quail with parsnips. That sounds really good. Cheese, Valiant blue cheese. Cigars, Fratello Cigars Toro. And then music, I will skip that because that's just beyond the scope that I would even suggest. That's completely subjective. Nonetheless, interesting lineup here. This one, obviously, it's got kind of a coffee back to a Russian Imperial. That's not that uncommon. But the pumpkin spices and the maple syrup, this is not a combination of ingredients that I've seen. Cacao nibs also pretty common, but I'm expecting this to be pretty interesting. It doesn't mention on here any lactose, so I don't expect this to be a sweet beer, but packed full of flavor regardless and aroma. Now this is 13.5, and this is a little short skinny can. It's actually a 12 ouncer, so the normal size of like a soda or a beer of any normal size. But I started seeing, for packaging purposes, a lot of brewers are doing these little taller, skinnier cans, kind of look like a Red Bull can. Really cool. Obviously 13.5%, that's a high ABV, so putting it in just a 12 ounce package, probably a good call. So we'll get this cracked, and we're going to use our nice all-purpose Sam Adams glass today. These are fantastic, and since this is just a 12 ouncer, this ought to get most of it in the first pour. It won't get the whole thing, to be certain. Well, maybe it will. Will that hold 12? Yeah, it will. And that's perfect. So I started it off like you normally would, then I went straight down the middle. It's a nice, narrow glass, but with a big tulip here, and gave plenty of opportunity to open up and form a head. So, visually, this is absolutely pitch black, as you would expect of an Imperial Stout. It's pitch black. I can see, just because the set lights are hitting the side and the very bright, very tiny, tiny, tight, slowly moving champagne-like bubbles. So yeah, this was thick. I could see that as I poured it. But it is pretty active in terms of carbonation. So I don't know how long this head is going to hang in there, but it did form one. So let's get right up and make the best use of that head and see what we got here. Oh, wow. Oh, that is pungent. Unbelievable. Let me see, even like 4, 5, 6 inches away from it. And then when you get right up and give any agitation, it's just massive. So what really jumps out at you on this beer is, first and foremost, hands down, those pumpkin spices that they added to this beer. And a little bit of that maple syrup vibe. In fact, they are so overtly pungent that I'm really not detecting anything that smells roasty. I'm not picking up the coffee on the nose. Obviously, the cacao nibs, that would be a tough thing to pick up just in aroma. But yeah, the pumpkin spices and the maple really jump right out of you at this glass. Unbelievable. Oh, it's just huge. It almost reminds me of like gingerbread cookies. It's got this kind of gingerbread cookie smell with like somebody's making, you know, maple syrup butter-soaked waffles in the background while you're working on gingerbread cookies. It smells amazing. So it looks great. It smells great. Head, it's almost out of the way. It is what it is. But nonetheless, we're going to jump right in and see exactly what this beer is about. Take one. Ooh, big beer, big beer, big flavors. So this is a beer that the ABV is so high, and you'll get this in high ABV beers, and you'll often get it with barrel-aged beers. There's this suggestion of sweetness up front as the pungency of the flavors hit and settle. It takes a couple seconds, and then it's pure roast. It's very dark. It's very roasty. And the first thing that really hits you is just exactly what you got on the aroma. It's pumpkin spice paired with maple syrup. It's very clean. So there's like this allspice, cinnamon, nutmeg kind of flavor combination happening. There's even a suggestion this would not be a normal pumpkin spice, but I'm tasting what almost tastes like star anise or cardamom. Cardamom is probably a bit too intense, so let's go with star anise. Or if you don't know what either of those are, what they taste like, smell like, not dissimilar to licorice, but not quite as intense, especially star anise. So I'm getting some vibe of that. So it's this nice kind of Christmassy, holiday, pumpkin spicy kind of thing happening, both aroma and flavor profile. And then the same thing is true of this maple syrup. And it's really, really nice together. And that is just the immediacy, what you get right up front. Pumpkin spice, maple. And then immediately behind it, well, not immediately, but roughly 2 seconds-ish, the intensity of that settles a little bit. Then the underlying roasty malt bill really starts to open up and bring itself to the forefront. It's very dark. It's very roasty. This one in this beer, it's not smoky. It doesn't put me in mind, especially since there's coffee in here as well. It does not put me in mind of like a French or Italian roast. And indeed, they used a Cubano roast, which is more like a medium blend, like a house medium blend, something like that. It's just good quality beans with plenty of them and roasted properly. Nice oils in there. So, you know, living in Tampa, there's a big, in Florida all over, but there's a really big Cuban population here, and Cubano coffee cafes are very big here. If you ever get the chance to try one, try some, absolutely worth your time. So it's a distinct flavor and aroma that I know. I couldn't get the aroma, but I get the flavor. It's really got a nice backbone to it. It's just pure, intense, nice coffee. No underpinnings of anything weird. It's got that kind of roastier, earthier side to it. It's not like some African blends can be. It doesn't really have fruity overtones. It's just what you would think of a nice traditional coffee. Very, very nice. So I definitely need to jump back in for a second sip. I was thinking about it, body and mouthfeel, but as soon as I swallowed, the flavor was going everywhere, so I started focusing there first. So I'm going to jump back in. We'll talk about the body and the mouthfeel, see if I missed anything. Then we'll talk about the balance and the finish. But first sip, really, really good beer. So take two. For a 13.5% ABV Russian Imperial Stout, this is not as heavy as you would expect. I would say it's a solid medium to medium heavy. It's not even a robust medium heavy. It's like medium to medium heavy. It's definitely got some presence, but nowhere near what you would expect for 13.5%. The mouthfeel, on the other hand, is very, very thick. It's very resistant. It's very viscous. So the mouthfeel kind of, for me, as mouthfeel and body are so often intrinsically intertwined, the mouthfeel brings a lot more substance to the table that kind of helps counterbalance the relative lack of heft that's coming from the body. But together, it's a very nice package. Mouthfeel spot on, that's perfection. Body not quite as heavy as I expected. In terms of, did I miss anything on the flavor profile? No. But on second sip, with everything re-intensifying, like I said, it's very thick, it's viscous. It does coat the palate very, very well. The coffee does become a lot more pronounced, as does the roasty underpinning. And yeah, it's very nice roasty underpinning. It's not smoky, there's no char, it's just deep roast. And that's where the cacao really kind of pops in and the coffee's binding to. So that malt bill plus the coffee and the cacao, they're binding there, and it's just a wonderful base. It's almost like having a really good quality, kind of latte like you might get from any big chain coffee place anywhere in the country, but with a really good Cubano roast coffee with Cubano beans as the backbone. It's really, really nice. It's really enjoyable. And that maple is such an interesting twist to this. It's not a combination of ingredients I ever would have thought of, but it absolutely works in this beer. It makes for a tremendously incredible aroma and a very unique and interesting flavor profile that's also absolutely delicious. So what do I think about the balance on this? It's great. The cacao is an ingredient that can often get lost in aroma and flavor, especially in a big beer like this with a lot happening. But after that second sip, because like I said, it is quite thick, it pops out quite clearly. It tastes strongly of cacao and is pairing beautifully with that coffee and that underpinning roasty malt bill. Beautiful, beautiful balance on this beer. Honestly, I wouldn't tweak it. I think I really see what they're doing here. And yeah, it's leading maybe a bit with the pumpkin spices, but then that kind of dials back and then everything else gets its turn. And the maple immediately pops in right alongside it, and they both kind of commingle, and then the coffee and the cacao bind with the malt bill and those commingle. So you get like the ingredients that kind of pair with one another in the various completely dichotomous, if you want to call it that, but opposite personalities of the same beer. It's absolutely fantastic. So, the finish now. This is longer than average, but considering the overall pungency of these ingredients and how big a beer it is as an RIS, it's not quite as long as I expected. I would just say it's kind of high end of average, maybe starting to border on the above average territory for length of finish. But considering the pungency and the ABV and what they did to this with the additives, it's not as long as you would expect, especially considering how thick it is and how well it coats the palate in between sips. I guess really what it is the intensity dies back pretty quickly and it's just vestiges. But as soon as you get another sip, it just intensifies over again and again and again. And it's really nice like that. And this is not dry at all. It's big, it's wet, it's full, it's round, all the way to the end. Really, really good beer here from Adroit Theory. Interesting combination of ingredients. I thought this one might be interesting to try, and I do believe that's the case. It's very, very good. Not what I expected. Never had a beer quite like this with this combination of ingredients, and it works great in the flavor and the aroma, and it's just a whole package beer right here. I'm going to take my time, sip on this one, count my scores. When we come back, we'll get this beer ranked from top to bottom. All right, now that we've gotten to enjoy this beer, we're going to get it ranked. This was Adroit Theory's What Evil Lurks, a Russian Imperial Stout clocking in at 13.5% ABV. This one was brewed with Cubano roast coffee, cacao nibs, pumpkin spices, and maple syrup. Adroit Theory is based in Purcellville, Virginia. So starting with the aroma on this beer was just absolutely massive. While I couldn't really pick out a ton of underlying malt character in the aroma, the other additives that they put in there, the pumpkin spices in particular, were very, very pronounced. This was one of those beers, several feet away, you can already start to get it. You get within inches right up on it, and it was just huge. It smelled amazing. The aroma did get a perfect 10 out of 10. For the taste on this beer was equally as huge as the aroma, but luckily the additives that they put in there did have their own voice in this beer. And indeed, it was a very rich, roasty beer to be certain. And I really enjoyed the specific blend of coffee and the additives and how they interplayed with the malt bill. I thought this was an extremely well-balanced beer, and the flavor profiles were big and bold. I absolutely loved it. The taste gets a 10 out of 10. For the body on this is one of the first categories here. It didn't get a perfect score. For a Russian Imperial at 13.5%, I did expect a lot more robust body than it had. And this was really just kind of on the high end of medium-ish, maybe approaching medium heavy. So not normally what you would associate with beer quite in this high of ABV range. It wasn't bad. It was really just kind of high end of average overall. So the body did get a 6 out of 10. Moving on to the mouthfeel. The mouthfeel, although body and mouthfeel are often very closely related, in this case the mouthfeel was quite a different story. It was extremely resistant and really felt exactly right resistance and thickness-wise to match that ABV. Frankly, the mouthfeel is what kind of helped boost up that relatively underwhelming comparatively body to where it kind of balanced itself out. But the mouthfeel was absolutely fantastic. Gets a perfect 10 out of 10. For the finish on this beer kind of surprised me because the aromas were massive, the flavors were massive, but the overall relative length on the end of the finish wasn't anywhere near as long as what I expected. I think really the case for this is that it wasn't aggressively bitter, it wasn't pungently bitter. Yes, there were a lot of additives and big bold flavors, and yes, it was nice and roasty, but typically without having a more substantial kind of bitter kick, it's not really going to drive out the length of the finish, and that was the case here. This was really just high end of average for the style. Not quite what I expected given the pungency, but it is what it is. The finish gets a 6 out of 10. For the head and retention, this one really didn't do that great of a job. It tried to form one in the beginning. It looked like it was okay, but it was one of those that was really active in terms of carbonation, and that head collapsed way too quickly. Yet again, it is what it is. Head and retention gets a 2 out of 10. For the appearance, this was absolutely pitch black as expected. The appearance gets a 10 out of 10. For the balance, talked about this in the flavor profile, and certainly it applies to the aromas as well. Big, bold, in your face, and really the balance in particular of the flavor side of the equation was just absolutely fantastic. The coffee, how it blended with the cacao, married with that malt bill, and then on the other hand, you got this maple syrup kind of binding with these very interesting blend of pumpkin spice flavors. All together, it just worked extremely well. All of the additives had their own voice. They worked well in the beer style. I love the balance. Balance 10 out of 10. Filling in the intangibles subjectively, despite some categories that didn't get as high a scores as you might expect, I subjectively loved it. Filling in intangible, 10 out of 10. Finally is an example of the style. So coming back to that, so there's 3 categories that didn't get a perfect 10. That's not that many, but the points that were lost, particularly in head and retention, were pretty big. So 17 total points across the board when we get to example of style. So without that, there were 16 lost. But really, body, finish, head and retention, yes, they're important. And yes, I'm ranking based on how I personally experience it and what's the norm for the style. In the whole big picture here, I don't think that having lost that volume of points really detracts from what this is as an example of style. Frankly, I thought it was very, very well done. Certainly well above average, but it was not quite perfection. So I only docked 1 point here. Example of the style does get a 9 out of 10, which brings the total score on Adroit Theory's What Evil Lurks to an 83 out of 100. So I've said this before. Look, the scores are what they are. I experience what I experience, and the scores, you know, it just comes out the way that it does. But don't let an 83 detract you. Well, 83, I'll wait till I see one that's mid-90s or higher. Absolutely do yourself the favor. If you like really big stouts, this was huge. And I gotta say it again. The combination of ingredients, and in this one in particular, the interesting flavors you don't always associate with pumpkin spice really, really worked well. And then that maple syrup addition, that was kind of a left field choice. It's not a combination I've ever seen in any other beers like this with this same kind of ingredients list. And that's what made this beer unique, and it was very, very special. This was absolutely a big, flavorful stout. For big stout fans, you cannot go wrong with this one. I absolutely would recommend this. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. If you want to stay in the loop when our videos go live, just turn on your notifications, hit the bell icon. It's right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.